You're watching Reality Check. From tomorrow, India's mega vaccine rollout will begin, and many are wondering whether it'll offer a glimmer of hope to India's pandemic-hit economy. Remember that India's growth has collapsed to historic lows. Now, there does appear to be some window of hope, some signs of a turnaround. The Reserve Bank of India says that the growth projections won't be minus 10% or close to minus 10%. It will be minus 7%. So it's that kind of good news. Even the other indicators which economic pundits are looking at as signs of a turnaround come with caveats. Many are pointing to what are called high frequency indicators. These are indicators that come at fairly regular and fast intervals, are showing an uptick, like car sales and GST collections and so on. But again, these come with caveats. Car sales, for example, have gone up if you compare December of 2020 to December of 2019, month versus month. But if you compare it to a year versus year, 2019 versus 2020, car sales are actually quite low, in some cases almost at a historic low. It's the same with GST collections as well. Same with a lot of these other indicators. So, what do we look forward to with the arrival of the vaccine? Will that accelerate India's recovery? Are there still serious concerns ahead? And of course, all of this very much on the finance minister's plate as she gets ready for what could end up becoming a crucial, pivotal budget. Joining me tonight on Reality Check, we have a terrific panel. We have with us Nilesh Shah, Managing Director, Kotak Mahindra Asset Management, and also a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Vikram Kirloskar, Vice Chairman, Toyota Kirloskar, former President CII, is with us. We also have Mahesh Vyas, Managing Director of CMI, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, Jayati Ghosh, Professor of Economics at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. But let me start with the only epidemiologist on the panel, which is Dr. K. Srinath Reddy of Public Health Foundation of India, joining us on this panel of economists and corporate CEOs. Dr. Reddy, give us a sense about how realistically the vaccine rollout is going to, in a sense, bring India back to some stage of normal, at which point then one can start looking at what sort of impact it will have on the economy. I know the government says that they want to do about 30 crores, which is roughly a third of our population, a little under that, by August of next year. Is that the sort of timeline we're looking at when things could start unlocking down even further? We could be less fearful of getting back to normal, or could it just be a longer haul?
Well, since you have been counting pieces of good news in the economy, let me start with the good news as far as health is concerned.
Yes.
All the indicators of the epidemic are looking good. We are seeing a fall steadily in the case count. We are seeing even the test positivity rates declining. We are seeing also the death counts falling, the daily death counts, as well as the hospitalization of serious cases also is following the same trend.
Right.
There are about 50 districts which are still showing an upward trend on a day-to-day basis, but overall the Indian picture is certainly very optimistic at the moment. However, we still need to be on guard because firstly, we do not know what the impact of the entry of the mutant strains of the virus would be in terms of lifting the number of cases, though it's likely that it's not going to be very virulent. Nevertheless, the overall case count may go up and some degree of serious cases also may flood the hospitals.
Sure.
We also are seeing a large number of potential super spreader events happening in terms of religious festivals, the Kumbh Mela and so on. So we need to keep a watch. The vaccine itself is going to be helpful in trying to provide protection against the virus to a large number of people as we proceed. But the vaccine rollout is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take several months. And we will have to maintain our public health precautions quite strictly. The COVID appropriate behavior that needs to be followed as an absolute strict rule.
I understand. Is there, very quickly, is there a time window that we can say, okay, if by, let's say, by August or September of next year, if we've met the target of inoculating 30 crore of our population, by then, would that be a safe time to say, okay, we're now in a good position vis-a-vis getting, business as usual, all of that, or is that, again, hard to say?
Well, basically, let's remember that the vaccine's main purpose is to prevent severe clinical infection. Its effect on transmissibility of the virus is still not demonstrated. It is likely, but it's not been tested.
Okay.
So we still need to maintain the caution.
Right.
However, it is very likely that if we actually protect the vulnerable and continue to maintain the kind of progress we have made in terms of curtailing the transmission,
yes,
we by September should be actually in a much better shape than we are now.
Okay.
Not that we are in a bad shape at the moment, but we'll certainly be in a better shape by then.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Kirloskar, let me ask you, from your vantage, as both someone who's both from your position as an industrialist, but also you're in the car business. Are you seeing enough signs that there is a turnaround, or are you still worried? Because again, as I mentioned in my introduction, December to December car sales, or auto sales rather, are up 6%. This is according to SIAM, which is the SIAM, Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. But April to December 2019 versus 2020, sales are still down 24%.
You have to realize that April, May, June, and maybe most of July, our sales are virtually zero. So you're really, comparing that 9 months or whatever till last 9 months is a difficult proposition. I think we have to look at month on month and see that there's been an improvement. I'm not even looking at last year. I'm looking at, say, December versus November versus October. And so on and so forth.
Are you seeing an improvement yourself, like for your own Toyota?
Yeah, we are definitely seeing an improvement. We are seeing a demand improvement. We were a little worried after the festival, after Diwali and all. Is that only for Diwali? But December has been equally strong, not only in retail sales, but also in order booking. So, January, February, March also looks quite good. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Okay.
I agree with the previous speaker that the people generally, I haven't moved around out of Bangalore, so I can't say firsthand. But what I've seen little bit that I've moved around in Bangalore is that people are following COVID etiquette very strongly. And that has certainly helped. I think factories are working very hard to follow etiquette, COVID etiquette and precautions. And I'm very, very hopeful. I think today the IMF managing director also has mentioned something similar. I read somewhere that India has done well on the pandemic, has done well on the initial lockdowns, though harsh, have given us results in the coming months.
Okay,
and I hope discipline will continue.
Right. There may be, some may contest that. And also, I can tell you, I mean, if Bangalore is following the rules, that's wonderful. But I have traveled fairly extensively, and I can tell you that Bangalore then could be an exception, because a lot of parts of India, people simply aren't following rules. But Nilesh Shah, do you also agree with Vikram Kirloskar about the fact that you are seeing these indicators of improvement, but also explain that paradox to us? Because how in this kind of situation where growth has shrunk so dramatically, are people able to even spend? Or is this pent up?
So clearly I agree with Mr. Kirloskar that month on month things have started improving. If we see the December headlines, FX reserves including forwards are upwards of $600 billion all-time high. GST collection 1,15,000 crore all-time high. E-way bill generation 16% up year on year all-time high. Power consumption at 1,83,000 megawatt all-time high, up 6% in December alone.
Right.
Railway freight loading is almost touching previous year level. So month-on-month improvement is undoubtedly there. If we compare 2020-21 vis-a-vis 2019-20, undoubtedly there will be negative growth. But month-on-month improvement is now giving optimism on the economy side.
But this is the thing that I want to ask Mahesh Vyas. Mahesh Vyas, we are trying to keep up with the job numbers you keep putting out. Correct me if I'm wrong here. You're looking at how close to 1.7 crore jobs may have been lost in the year, in this past year. The numbers continue to look grim. You may want to share more accurate or updated numbers if you like. Try to resolve that with what we've just heard from Nilesh Shah and from Mr. Kirloskar, that if indeed you find large numbers of Indians either without work or with pay cuts, where exactly is this, what is fueling this reverse economic uptick?
See, the best way in which we can resolve this conundrum, that on the one hand, car sales, two-wheeler sales, tractor sales are rising.
Yes.
Electricity generation is increasing, GST collections are increasing, EA bills are increasing.
Yes.
A lot of the fast frequency numbers are showing a good increase.
Yes.
And on the other hand, there is stress on the income levels. On the income I'm talking about, not about the employment. So what has happened is that after a very sharp contraction in the economy in the first quarter, we saw a fairly good and rapid improvement in the economy. So we did have nearly a V-shaped recovery for sure in terms of what the fast frequency numbers tell us,
Right.
and also in terms of what the employment numbers tell us.
Right.
Mind you, the fall in employment was about 122 million jobs in April, and today in December, the shortfall is of about 15 million jobs. So we have covered a lot.
Right. That's huge.
But what has happened?
Yes.
But what has happened is that people have shifted from better paying jobs to less better paying jobs or poorer jobs. So while jobs have come back, incomes have not come back. So there's a K-shaped recovery, so to say. The rich have become richer because the stock markets are doing very well. They are buying more cars for sure.
Sure.
The upper middle classes have saved a lot of money because they didn't have avenues to spend for a good part of this financial year. And they are showing that by buying more cars, by spending a little more money on other things. At the same time, you have people who lost their livelihoods. And that is where the GDP is showing a shrinkage. The MSMEs, the small sector, the unorganized sector, the informal sector,
Yes.
that's where incomes have taken a big hit. So
Right.
I think inequalities have increased as the economy has recovered.
Right. That's an interesting way of trying to explain that paradox. Jayati Ghosh, would you agree with that? Because as Mahesh Vyas was saying, that people are spending on other things. For example, they're not able to travel. So travel, tourism, those sectors have been very badly hit. They're not showing any recovery at all. They're showing, the numbers look pretty bleak. So behind this kind of veneer of a turnaround, there are serious concerns.
Absolutely. I agree with Mahesh that, really this is K-shaped. But I would put it broadly that the recovery is in the formal sector. And the informal sector continues to collapse. In other words, what you see is that consumer durables, especially those which are purchased by people who have largely retained employment or incomes, maybe not exactly at the same level, but more or less, are now able to spend on a whole range of consumer durables. And so there is recovery in that area.
Right.
We don't have enough data on what is happening. We do know that micro and small enterprises are continuing to collapse at a very, very dramatic rate. We know that when people find employment in formal work, they're finding it often as a small fraction of the wages that they got earlier. And that, in fact, the demand for what are called fast-moving consumer goods, or for consumer non-durables, is still slumping hugely. Because essentially a very, very large part of the population has much lower incomes. And that is bound to feed its way eventually to the formal sector. It may look V-shaped right now, but unless we get very dramatic changes, let's say in the fiscal stance and so on, this is also going to peter out. And you're going to find exactly what was happening to the economy before the pandemic struck, which is that the catastrophe of the informal sector was eventually making its way, it was being felt even in the formal sector.
Right.
Because that collapse of demand, you cannot really sustain that indefinitely. It's bound to hit even organized activities.
Right. Vikram Kirloskar, respond to that. Because the fact is, Mr. Kirloskar, the fact is that many people say the fact that corporates, when they talk of corporates turning around and markets doing well, the analysis, in fact, the RBI's own position paper on this says one of the reasons is because corporates have done a lot of cost cutting. People have been laid off, salaries have been reduced, and that is being reflected as profits. You may not be necessarily producing more, but by doing, in some cases, severe cost cutting, you're showing a profit.
I think the concern is well justified. I'm concerned equally as much as anyone else that, I'm always worried about employment. We have to get higher employment in the country overall, top to bottom. That's certainly a big concern. One of the things that has happened during the pandemic, like you said, it's not only cost cutting. I think companies have changed their way of work. They have a new business model in. We've got rid of our corporate office.
Right.
Okay? We've to the factory of working from home. We have not let go of any people or anything. We're still keeping everyone. But we are definitely, our efficiencies have improved tremendously. And I'm sure it's the same case. If you look at the operating margins of most of the big companies and whatever results that are coming, they're all showing higher operating margins. And if this is a concern for employment in the short term.
Yes.
But I think in the long term, this has forced a lot of companies to get very competitive. Okay.
But Mr. Kirloskar,
changing their way of work is getting them more competitive. I think getting them more oriented towards an export market, even towards the local market. Finally, competitiveness will
competitiveness is fine, but if it comes at the cost of jobs, that becomes a problem. But Srinath Reddy, I don't want to draw you too much into the sort of the economic aspect of the debate, but looking around the world, when you look at other countries and how they've tried to balance out both managing the virus, but also trying to, in a sense, offer a protective basket to the economy, are you seeing any examples that India could look at? Now we've got almost a year of the into the virus.
Well, we have seen many countries offering social safety nets and protection, including salary protection or other forms of income protection, so that people could actually cope with the difficulties of the pandemic period. And even in terms of protecting the jobs, I think a fair amount has been done.
Sure.
But I would only like to make one point, Srinivasan, that even as the economy recovers, the attention from health should not slip. Because time and again we have seen that neglect of health chronically affects the economy, but public health emergencies are the banana peels on which the economy will keep slipping if we continue to neglect the health system.
Right.
And in terms of employment, let me make a statement that health sector is going to be one of the biggest job creators in India and globally.
Right.
And therefore, that should also be seen as a potential fillip to the economy.
Interesting.
And creating a large number of jobs for young people.
Okay. Interesting. Very quickly, as we wind down on the show, Nilesh Shah, budget coming up. Are we going to see the government finally be less fiscally hawkish and now seriously start to provide that safety net, start putting money into the hands of the people, especially those at the bottom end of the spectrum? Or is there just no money to go? I mean, are they broke?
Indian government is fairly asset rich. There are ways to raise revenue without raising taxes and spend enough money to support economy without turning out to be fiscally profligate.
Will that happen though? Because it's not happened yet or nowhere to the extent that many had hoped.
The market is definitely hoping that.
Okay. Well, the market may hope, but what about the people? Mahesh Vyas, what's your sense? Do you think that there could be much more of the opening of purse strings?
Well, I wouldn't hazard a guess on this. What will the government do? The government is largely unpredictable. So we had all expected the government to spend during this lockdown period. It made several announcements of lots of monies to be spent, but year on year, this year they have spent less. I mean, they are almost spending less than last year. So first half. The expenditure was 0.6% higher than last year. And now in October, November, there's a little more spending. But there is a lot that needs to be done. The only cue we had is that the National Statistical Office's projections for this financial year indicates that there will be a very substantial recovery in the economy, and the breakup given of that implies that the government will be spending a lot of money, because the composition of that growth shows that government expenditure will be dramatically high. Will that happen? We need to wait and see.
Okay. Jayati Ghosh, last word from you. Do you think that could happen, or who knows?
I don't want to predict what the government will do, but I know what it should do. It should dramatically increase spending, but particularly it should actually begin by ensuring that it buys all the vaccines. At the moment, there's no clarity on who's going to pay for the vaccines, for state governments or the centre. The centre really has to take over the entire vaccine purchase. It's about, I think, maximum 57,000 crore. And it has to spend much more on health, as Srinath Reddy pointed out, immediately. I think there's no question about that, quite apart from the fiscal and macroeconomic implications. These are immediate public health issues that we need even to revive the economy.
Okay. Well, let's see how that unfolds or doesn't. But thank you all so much for joining me tonight on Reality Check. You've been a great panel. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have on the show. Good night.